Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Balanced Lens, where we examine faith, culture, and politics from a balanced perspective. The reason we do this is to try to give people a perspective from both sides of the aisle. You can read one side of the news and think, yeah, this is correct, and this is what has to be absolutely true. And you can go on this rabbit trail and believe really lies. And so here, what we do in the balance lens, we look at both sides, we examine facts, and we try to give you an unbiased, impartial perspective on what's happening in the news. And so something that's been pretty hot off the press is this big war with Iran. And today we've had some new developments, and people are very divided on U.S. intervention in this war. We're America first, but why are we on the other side of the globe finding a war? And so, to begin with, taking a step back from the war, we ask ourselves this question: what are the U.S.'s primary and secondary strategic and political and military objectives in Iran? What are our goals, and have we actually achieved them?
It's a great question, and I think before we dive into the goals, you present the background of why should we even care. There are other countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. There's Russia, there is North Korea, and North Korea is headed by somebody who's not stable in any sense of that word. So the question is like, why Iran? Why are we so worried? We covered this in one of our podcasts before that there is a core contingent of people, especially in the regime, who believe in this very small sect. They are of a small sect of Shia Islam. They call it Shia, the 12er branch of Shia Islam, and they have a very like they believe that they are waiting for their Messiah, the 12th Mahdi, to come, and he will come when there is a lot of chaos in the world, and it's connected to them contributing to the chaos in some way, which is it's just a very weird way of thinking. And obviously, they have stated over and over again that they want to completely eliminate Israel, and they continuously chant death to America. And they have actually directly and indirectly been involved in hurting Americans all around the world. So, just as a background, quickly, I wanted to give our audience that. Now we come to our objectives. So, I will admit that there's sometimes the shades of gray in the objectives, depending on who speaks when. But bottom line, for sure, there's always been agreement that nuclear capability for Iran is a no-no. They should not have nuclear weapons. So eliminating that capability is number one of the goals. Then dismantling their missile and drone programs. Their missile program is very robust. Thousands and thousands of missiles, ballistic missiles. The third one is annihilating their naval power. Fourth one is severing proxy support in the region. And with that, so that we can support Israel and our allies, right? So they can, not just Israel. These proxies create a lot of problems for our allies in the region, like Saudi and UAE, etc. And then, of course, protecting ours and the global interest, maritime transit, because that's in our interest. Because we are the protectors of the world, in the sense like many countries in the world use the dollar for transacting, right? It is in our best interest to make sure, and it is our kind of our responsibility. The reason why we are able to calibrate the dollar the way we can and control it, because number one, because they trust us to have sound economic policies and calibrations, but two, to protect our allies' interests around the world, no matter where they are, which this is why it's a little tricky, right? For some people who are like isolationists, like you unfortunately cannot, the way it's structured, you cannot pull yourselves out completely. So those were the military objectives: nuclear capability elimination, dismantling the drone and missile capabilities, annihilating their naval power, severing their proxy support in the region. In terms of secondary things, that's where you have got having an impact on the regime, in the sense like I don't believe it was always a hope that there would be a full change, especially because of all the events that happened in January with the unrest and the uprising, but at least an alteration. So the point is, like, similar to how we did in Venezuela, can an alteration in the regime get us forward, right? So one of the hypotheses is Ali Khamenei, who took over in the 80s, like 1980, in the 80s, sorry, late 80s, he's been there for decades. The question is, can an alteration make a change in how Iran views the world and interacts with the world, right? So that was one of the secondary objectives that we had, and to ensure that we have a stronger control over the Strait of Hormuz, because Iran constantly always threatened the strait with blockades, etc., so they could control their neighbors.
Yeah, and this war has been going on for a few weeks. And if we think about how their actual military infrastructure has been affected by the war, militarily, Iran has really taken a beating. It's been a heavy success by all, at least US and Israeli accounts. Over 13,000 targets have been hit, taking out about 80% of Iran's air defenses from their weapons factories, hundreds of ballistic missile sites, most of their naval assets. Pete Hegseth called it a complete destroying of their defense industrial base. And it's not going to be easy for them now to rebuild missiles or drones or launchers. Nuclear sites also took a big hit. But now, politically, what's interesting, the regime is still standing. However, with leadership shifts, they appoint leaders. Many of these leaders are targeted, killed. And so there's still a huge amount of pressure on the leadership, and their proxies are reeling too. On the civilian side, if we look at how their civilian infrastructure has been affected by the war, it's heartbreaking and it's messy. Strikes have targeted military and dual use sites, but Tehran and other areas, they saw widespread disruption of power, fuel shortages, bridges, infrastructure was damaged in the crossfire. All these things, not only just important to the military, but also important to a civilian population. At the capital, Tehran turned into somewhat of a ghost town early on. People were afraid to go to work. UN reports highlighted disproportionate civilian suffering, thousands displaced, broader economic pains across the region. Casualty figures vary wildly depending on the source, but nevertheless, the human cost is undeniable. The ceasefire, which we're in right now, has really paused the worst of the bombing, and this new Lebanon truce helps really de-escalate spillover. But rebuilding is going to be long, it's going to be painful for ordinary Iranians. Militarily, a success. The nuclear program has been essentially decapitated, at least for now. Deep political the transformation, that's still a work in progress. Where are we with having a real internal, strong Iranian political movement to displace the current regime? Unknown. We really don't know what the state of that. And so we'll see what comes out of this truce and what comes out of this period of negotiation. But we think about one of the key points in Iran, right? The Strait of Hormuz, a lot of people go fill up their gas, and you hear about oil and the price of oil escalating because of the Strait of Hormuz. Most people probably didn't know where the Strait of Hormuz was until a few weeks ago, and Iran's move on the Strait of Hormuz could have been seen as a surprise. And so let's talk about that. What exactly is the status of it? Was this a surprise in this actual war to shut down the strait?
Absolutely not. It's always been, ever since they were formed, one of their key leverage points. And honestly, that's one of the biggest reasons why a lot of presidents hesitated to really deal with Iran. And you can't blame them. Like they do have, it's very interesting how you can use the resources that you have to maintain leverage. It's a great lesson for people to learn and as they navigate through the world. But yes, it was no surprise whatsoever. I was extremely surprised that I heard a lot of people in the media, including some pundits, talk about it being a surprise, and that's what was surprising to me. We have been wargaming this scenario for decades. Like, I don't know if our audience knows how disciplined our military is, how much planning they do, how much scenario planning and wargaming they do for different scenarios and different the reports that come out about it, right? So this is basically what one would call asymmetric warfare. There's no way they can stand against the might of the US military or even the Israeli military. But this is how you wage asymmetric warfare based on the things that you can do. Drone warfare, for example, is fantastic, right? Think about it, right? Can we send in a swarm of drones? Maybe, right? But because of the standards that we use during warfare, if you think about how we fought and the bombs we dropped, they were all precision bombs. So I'm sure our audience saw some of the briefings, and what you would see, you'd see a truck which is probably having a mobile launcher or some missiles that it's carrying. The strike happens on the truck, and that's it. Everything else around it there's nothing touched. That's precision warfare, right? So we are very careful in how we attack and who we attack so that there is no unintended consequence or casualties that happen. If you do drones, like the way Iran just sends swarms of drones, it goes hits wherever. Like there's a lot of damage that happens, right? That's asymmetric warfare. But Iran, I just want to also laud Iran on the strategy that they use, which is really, really cool. Like think about the Strait of Hormuz, and what do these guys do? They have not the big naval vessels that we have. They're like small boats. They're speedboats that can go, and they're either manned or unmanned. They have both, and it'll carry the firepower you need to go and just crash into something and explode. It's like a suicide bomber type thing. So that's one thing they have. They also have, of course, we know about the drones that can do the same thing. They also have underwater, like UAVs. It's underwater aerial vehicles, UWVs, I think. It's underwater vehicles. There's UAV and underwater vehicles. Like it's pretty amazing the approach and the strategy and the thinking and the planning that they have done on their end to be able to execute what they want to execute when something like this happens. So remember, like we have been war game planning, they have been doing it the same too. But this move was not surprising at all. They wanted to disrupt traffic, and they didn't have to do a lot of damage for that. You only have to execute one. This is why it's called asymmetric warfare, because you just have to hit one oil tanker. What happens is that all these oil tankers that are going through the Strait of Hormuz, they have insurance, just like we do. They have insurance that if something happens, right, pirates, blah, blah, whatever. As soon as the Strait of Hormuz got blocked and there was some, like Iran blew up some of the tankers, so I think one, two, or three, maybe a little more than that. The insurance agencies were unwilling to insure the vehicle that is going through the strait. And as soon as you don't insure it, then nobody travels through it. That's why it's called asymmetric warfare. They don't have to go and bomb everything. They just have to make sure that they do one and then keep up the threat. Super smart. Now, so because 20% of the world's oil goes through there, right? That's a big deal for a lot of countries. 80% of Iranian oil, for example, was actually going to China. There's a whole bunch of oil that is coming from, and if you look at the strait, I don't have the map, but if you have to look at the strait, you've got Kuwait and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, UAE. They all need to use that strait to send their oil out. So it was affecting Japan and South Korea and the Europeans and a lot of people, India, Pakistan, like everybody. There's a lot of people who actually in that part of the world that depend on oil that comes through the Strait of Hormuz because it's a choke point. I believe it's like 21 nautical miles at its narrowest point. That's how tight it is. So it has to come to that tight spot. And it's shared, the Strait of Hormuz, just so our audience know, half is shared with Iran, the other half is with Oman. So it's between Oman and Iran. So the calculation that Iran had was that once this happens, this is going to spike the oil prices, right? Once the prices spiked, what happens is there's a lot of pressure on the US to stop the warfare, right? They'll get a lot of pressure. They were thinking, what I've heard is that it would go between 150 and $200 per barrel. And at that point, it becomes really tough to continue the war. To the surprise of many pundits, many economists and political strategists, it did not really go beyond, I believe, maybe at one point it was 125 for a brief time, then it came back down. So people were surprised that it did not happen. I'm sure Iran is also surprised, and they have taken note that in their next war game planning, the price is not going to go that high. But that was one of the things so that was their calculation with the strait, and that's why it's important. It was not surprising. I'm guessing a lot of the stuff that our administration did helped keep the price a little low, right? They unsanctioned certain oil that was going through the strait from Iran. They let some oil through. I know that there was some rhetoric from President Trump that, hey, you can come and buy our oil. A lot of this stuff really, like if you think about it, obviously people are not going to come and just buy our oil, but the rhetoric helps calm the market down. Oh, okay, I guess the US has oil. And by the way, the US is a net oil exporter right now. So there's no bluff there. But it's not like, everybody can come over here and get whatever oil they couldn't get through the Strait of Hormuz. But, those there is a rhetoric, there is a portion there which is meant to be theatric, and it helps calm the markets down. And I guess it worked because it didn't really go as planned for Iran. So it's very interesting. And the latest news, by the way, on the Strait of Hormuz was that as soon as the street ceasefire was declared, that was about, I believe, it was last Tuesday or Wednesday, it went into effect, the US declared a blockade. So basically, the US told Iran, sorry, it told the world and Iran that if you are picking and choosing who goes to the strait, so what was happening is anybody who wanted to go to the strait had to get approval from Iran. Those were the only tankers that went to the strait unharmed because they knew to go close to the coast of Iran and go to the Strait of Hormuz. So, and the issue was that, and I think this is real from what I've heard, they dropped a couple of mines, not many, but a few mines in the Strait of Hormuz, but they were so panicked that they don't even know where they dropped it, which is crazy. But they do know a certain portion they did not drop it, so they allow for safe passage there. So what they were doing is they were taking full advantage of it. If whoever, whether it's a Chinese or whoever wanted oil, it had to get Iran's permission, and they also wanted to charge a toll, some crazy high toll. I forget how much it was. I forgot. It was a big number, 2 million per tanker or something. 2 million or something big. Which, if you think about like what 100, 200 tankers going a day, they'll make like $2 billion or something. Like it is just a ridiculous amount of money. But anyway, so the blockade that the U.S. declared said basically that hey, if you're controlling it, we are going to control it on our end. If everyone can't go to the strait, no one should go to the strait. It's all or none. And I mean, there was like people weren't sure, but it's a full blockade as far as I know. And thankfully, the U.S. hasn't had to board any ships or do anything crazy. People are adhering to the blockade, and so you can see now the pressure building now on Iran on okay, now what do they do? What is their move? And so today, the latest news is that both Iran and Iran has declared that, from our end, we are not having no blockade on the strait anymore. It's completely open. Now, remember, there's still some mine, one or two or three, I don't know, nobody knows how many, but a few mines out there that still needs to be cleared out. But otherwise, whatever it's very interesting that they kind of said, you know what, let's just open it up. It's not working because remember, Iran's getting a lot of pressure too. So because a lot of their oil goes to China and other places, China has a lot of influence on Iran because they work very closely strategically and militarily, and they get a lot of cheap. China gets a lot of cheap oil from Iran. So when the oil prices was about $60-$65 per barrel, China used to buy from Iran oil at a discounted price at like $45-$47. So it's a discounted price they get, remember. And that's also why, if you think about why are Chinese goods so cheap? Well, here we go. They have like a sanctioned oil that they're getting from cheap from Russia and Iran and different places, and even Venezuela. Like they used to get it. And so that's one of the ways that you can make your things cheaper if your fuel costs are low. So it's a whole. The reason why I'm going through different aspects of it is like there's a lot of connectivity to. It's not just a single piece puzzle. It's a multi-layered, multi-dimensional thing. And if you hear to some of the people who comment on what's going on, they say it's even though our direct objective was Iran and controlling them, etc. There were indirect secondary objectives of making sure that China stayed in place. China gets a message that the US will not be timid if they violate certain boundaries. Like, for example, they want to take over Taiwan, right? They have other interests. So now when they see a bold US, my guess is they are not going to make any plans while President Trump is in office.
Yeah, excellent analysis. The Strait of Hormuz is so fascinating, right, for all those reasons, because it's such an international choke point. But taking a step back, let's go back a few months. Iran had three primary points of leverage that they were trying to use. Number one, they had a forward army, proxies through Hamas, Hezbollah, their Iraqi proxies, the Houthis. Number two, they had nuclear ambitions. Number three, they had the Strait of Hormuz. Now, here's what happened. Their proxies were essentially decapitated and destroyed in the last few months. The nuclear ambitions, secondly, also deferred, basically decapitated. As this war has come to this point, they held on to their last leverage point, the Strait of Hormuz. And as you mentioned, their hope was drive up the price of oil, get the world angry, pressure on the US, and use that as leverage to end the world and the war. Current status as of today, big positive shift. Both Trump and Iran's foreign minister have confirmed that the strait is completely open and ready for commercial passage. Now, how do you go from a full blockade to this being completely open? Number one, like you mentioned, they miscalculated how the price of oil would actually fluctuate. Number two, what's really interesting, a lot of tankers that needed oil started to say, hey, wait a minute, let's just go to the US where you don't have to pay this massive toll. Let's sail around. And so you started to see this flow of tankers actually bypassing the Strait of Hormuz, finding alternate strategies to actually get oil. Thirdly, there was tremendous amount of pressure from China. And so China in the back, behind the scenes, put pressure on Pakistan to force Iran essentially back to the table and open the strait. And so you see how this actually backfired against Iran's own ally, as you mentioned. And so China had a big part in playing in opening this strait and getting this really open for commercial traffic again. And so really fascinating when you think about all the factors in the Strait of Hormuz. So this wasn't like an Israeli operation, like some people say, right? It's not like Israel trying to control the strait. There's much more that goes into play when you think about Iran using this as a point of leverage to attempt to win the war, which at this point they've lost really all leverage. But that brings us to this next point. It seems like the administration is stating that we're going to have some type of deal. And we look at negotiations right now. We're in this hopeful but tense holding pattern. The 2 week US Iran ceasefire from April 8th is still technically on, though talks in Pakistan collapsed without a breakthrough a few days ago. But now we have this fresh 10-day truce between Israel and Lebanon. Trump seems upbeat. He says a permanent ceasefire could come pretty soon. Iran seems to want a deal pretty bad. And there's hopefulness that this next round of talks might happen this weekend. It would seem that Trump does not want to go back to war. It would seem that Iran does not want to go back to war. VP Vance led the last round of talks, and there's talk of even extending uh, this 2 week truce by another 2 weeks just to keep momentum going in conversation. Now, what's interesting, you think about what they're negotiating about. There's been a lot of concessions and there's been a lot of progress, but Iran has been pushing back on some terms like full nuclear concessions and proxies, and they've floated big reparations and big demands. The blockade right now is still leverage. Trump showed real courage by walking away from bad offers and imposing this blockade, and this blockade is still on for Iranian tankers and Iranian ports. So in terms of pressure, it's worked. We're in a strong position. There hasn't been a full breakthrough yet the opening of the strait and this truce with Lebanon is definitely good steps forward. So we'll watch and see what the next few days hold. Nevertheless, is Iran going to have deep political transformation over the weekend? Absolutely not. But that's the reality. It's going to take time. It's going to take really a coalition of a lot of different forces to come together to really create deep internal transformation that a lot of people really want. Now, interesting, you think about Donald Trump and how he's led this conflict. He's been using Truth Social and the media, and it's been making a lot of headlines. He made a tweet last week, or not a tweet, but he made a post last week on his platform, Truth Social, about civilization erasure. Before the April 7th deadline, he said, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. What are your thoughts on that? Was that appropriate? Was he out of his mind? Or was this good leverage?
It's extreme language, and this is right before, right? So, as you said, is April 7th, right before the deadline is approaching. He set the deadline out of the blue and said you have 48 hours or something, I think close to 48 hours to make a deal. And then the previous, when they were not coming forth, I think it was they were not coming forth. So people were like, okay, now what? If they don't do, what happens? And that's when President Trump makes a statement, right? Which it's pretty dramatic. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. And he threatened bridges, power plants, energy infrastructures. It's pretty dramatic. And there were a lot of people who were very worried about that type of rhetoric. When I talk to some people that I know in that area, they were worried that are we talking about nuking Iran? This is a type of thinking that some people were like worried about. So, but from President Trump's perspective, I think people who know him well, he used this as a tactical, it's very tactical just to use extreme rhetoric to get them back to like real negotiation. Because remember, Iran had they were at least like face value, they were acting as if they could keep fighting. And to an extent they can, because all they need to do is survive. For Iran, remember, we talked about our objectives and military objectives and political objectives and all that kind of stuff. Iran has only one single objective. When I'm talking Iran, I'm talking only about the IRGC led regime in Iran, right? The clerical regime, the radical regime in Iran. That's all I'm talking about. The Iranian people are absolutely wonderful people. But for that regime, their only objective, so their measure of success is a single measure, survival. If they survive, they have won the war, which is a very low bar to win a war. So now think about like we are going and fighting someone, and their
It's
definition
like
is
if I can jump in, it's like saying I'm on a ventilator, so I should be ready to run a marathon like in a month, right?
it's just absolutely crazy. So you're talking about such people, and people who, a lot of experienced people who know Middle East politics and Middle East type of language and literature, there's a lot of hyperbole that's used during when they talk and negotiate. And sometimes also like there are certain types of people who only can be brought to the table with force, meaning you have to use force to be able to bring them to the table. And this is obviously using verbal force. And I don't think, I mean, I did not believe for a second he would do anything close to what he was saying. But I did believe that he would, the level of bombing that he would do would definitely be escalated. And I'm sure he would target a few very strategic infrastructure, bridges, etc., that is tied to IRGC to make his point. But that's all it was. But you can see how there were people who basically said, no, you need that. That's the type of language you need because they had 24 hours. And at that point, they had to make a call. Is President Trump bluffing? Or will he do something really dramatic that's going to put them on the back foot? They had to make a call. And we know how it ended. It ended positively, right? And then, President Trump does this really well, where he's able to, I wouldn't say visualize, but if you listen to the news right now, he's saying a deal is very close. Now, the deal may not technically be that close as he says, but he will try to will some of the things that he wants into existence. I'll give you another example. In the Gaza Israel war, when the proposal was made and they were negotiating the deal with with the Hamas for the ceasefire for the war to finally end, Hamas did not actually say agree to the proposal. They just said the proposal looks reasonable. We have a few things that we probably need to negotiate further or something like that. That was their response, as I understand it. There are a few points that we don't fully agree, but we can talk about it. And what President Trump said is like, they agreed to the deal. We are on. In 24 hours, we should and he set a goal timeline. Hey, we'll be able to sign at this time. So there is something to be said about that where you kind of are able to see through the noise into an end goal that you want to accomplish that is relatively reasonable for both parties, even if the other party is not all the way there. And then you just don't waste, how you have the 80-20 rule? Don't get to 80%, 90%, but don't completely make the 10% be the reason you walk away and everything gets destroyed. That's his strategy. Again, like I said, there were a lot of people who were up in arms. They said it was genocidal language, it's war crimes. How could he say that? Is this not befitting for a president? There is some people who said, "Is this is going to affect our brand? U.S. is considered to be a special country with high moral standards. We carry the torch for the world. Is this the right way to handle something like this?" And they're legitimate questions, I will say. I think when he used that language, I was a little taken aback. That's extreme rhetoric, which took me also.
Yeah, excellent analysis. Thinking through his comments on Truth Social, was it appropriate as a spokesman of the United States? No, and I'll say that. No, full stop. I'm not going to add anything to that. However, if you are so taken back by his comments, his supposedly genocidal comments, but you did not comment on the fact that Iran literally killed 30,000 people in one night on January 9th, a total of 42,000 innocent people so far in the last few weeks that are protesting the Iranian regime, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what's worse, a Truth Social post or genocide actually happening? And so that's a question we need to ask ourselves. As a commander in chief, supporters saw this as classic Trump tough talk that helped produce a ceasefire and the Strait reopening. Results over these niceties of how kind he is on Truth Social. Obviously, critics slammed it as reckless, crossing into genocidal adjacent territory or war crimes rhetoric, things that hurt the U.S. moral standing. But again, if we're not going to acknowledge the fact that Iran has been killing tens of thousands of protesters, we're blind to our own facts. It definitely escalated the moment. No one's going to deny that. But it coincided with de-escalation steps in the days after. It's vintage Trump, right? It's unfiltered, it's high stakes, love it or hate it. The Strait is open today. It looks like we're coming to an end of the war. We'll see this weekend. So maybe he was right and maybe it worked. You may not like that answer, but here we are, right? We'll see what happens. Moving on to another person that's been vocal about his opposition to the war has been the Pope. Pope Leo, the American born pontiff, has been vocal, calling out a delusion of omnipotence in the war, lamenting leaders who spend billions on conflict while invoking religion, and warning the world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants. Now, he didn't directly mention Trump, but everyone knew who he was talking about. He pushed hard for dialogue, peace, and rejecting war, without naming Trump directly, obviously, in his latest remarks from Cameroon. But the timing made it clear. And Trump pushed back, saying he has to do what's right. And what the Pope needs to understand is that Iran can have nukes. And so the question is, were the Pope's comments appropriate? First of all, take a step back and say this. It is good for people of faith to make commentary about political matters, social matters, and any societal matter, as long as you are informed with facts from both sides. It's a good thing for you to infuse biblical values into society, as long as you are looking at things objectively, not hiding from the facts, not obscuring yourself from what's obvious, and really being balanced, no pun intended, about your approach to a situation. So, in my opinion, the Pope's comments were an overreach. They were inappropriate only because he refused to acknowledge the fact that Iran has been the sponsor of terrorism for the literal last 45 years. They've killed tens of thousands of people through their actions in the world. I understand his heart. I understand his sentiment, right? We all want peace. But unfortunately, evil people just don't back down. And unfortunately, war is sometimes necessary. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a I agree with your initial point that we need people of faith to speak up. We need people to talk, right? Having a discussion is good, whether you agree or disagree. Disengaging is the worst thing that can happen, right? Be engaged, talk. As a pope and in the religious field, it is of course like the standard that they bear is to always speak peace to whatever the conflict is, right? The counter to that is, where was the Pope when the 30,000 people were killed in 2 or 3 days? Why is that not? Why is that okay in any definition? I'm sure it wasn't okay, but why were people not infuriated across the world? Because I really did not see it. I was watching all the different news. So that is the counter to that. Like, it's okay to stand up for the cause of the Palestinian people, for example, or the people of Iran, but be consistent and stand for everybody who's suffering across the world. That would be the counter I would give. But as a pope and as priests of different churches and pastors, they should always strive for peace because their angle is not necessarily pragmatic. Their angle is more moral. They're talking about the moral balance, and that's good. It's good to inject moral discussions. And then we have the political discussions. You want the military aspects, the political aspects, the moral aspects, all these things to come because they're different dimensions. And you want them to come to the public sphere so people can really think, how we talked about thinking through nuances. In order for people to think through nuances, you have to introduce that nuances. And it's good for the Pope to introduce the moral nuance because it's people are more willing to accept and listen to the nuance when it comes from somebody with that type of authority.
Yeah, many people have this opinion that religious people should stay out of political issues and, vice versa. But I think the Bible calls us to be salt and light has to infuse darkness. Now, I don't agree with the Pope's comments, but I do think it's good for people of faith to talk about issues like peace, to talk about things like empathy and humanity. Now, obviously, negotiating with a tyrannical Iranian regime for the last 40 years has not brought us to that point. But I think if you're going to make a commentary about an issue, it's important to be informed, to understand this decades long conflict, to really take off any perception of bias you may have, to remove any personal inclination towards one side or the other, and be objective and apply the Bible based on that particular viewpoint. Wrapping up, is the U.S. in too deep? It's been a few weeks now. We have tens of thousands of military personnel there. We have bombed Iran repeatedly over the last few weeks. The cost is enormous. Are we in too deep that we can't get out now, or is an off-road possible? What do you think?
So the answer, I would say, if I were to think through the entirety of the picture, is a hard no. We are not in too deep at this point. If you think about it, right, the conflict started February 28th and has paused April 7th. I believe April 8th was a ceasefire, so it's like about 40 days of bombardment and conflict. So our military objectives were very focused, the targets were very focused, the way we executed our campaign was very focused and based on high standards of ethics. It is purely like there's no quote unquote boots on the ground, right? So when we think about too deep, most people are trying. I'm thinking they're anchoring in what happened in Vietnam, what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in Iraq. That's what too deep means, right? And then, I would also think that President Trump has created a new standard, the Venezuela standard, the one-day conflict, so to speak, right? Which was incredible to a lot of people. So if you think about it from again, if you compare to the anchors of Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, like we are nowhere in that realm at all. Very limited air-based campaign, very targeted strikes. From a US perspective, less than 15 casualties, which is amazing. And even our equipment and planes, we have some destruction happening due to enemy fire, but very less. And as a matter of fact, some of them happened due to friendly fire, not due to enemy fire. So, like, it is very precise, I would say. Like, the economic costs are more trickier, trickier to assess because it's going to take a while, right? The prices that we see today, from what I understand, the oil prices, et cetera, which translates to food and everything else that is going on. Just because the oil price that we see has come down from whatever it was, like 120 to 110, and now all the way down to like the low 80s, that doesn't mean that our fuel prices are going to just climb down that fast. Qatar, I believe one of the things it lost is like 20% of its like production has been impacted. So there's going to be real impact to this war, economic impact. I think so far it is manageable and it's not gone off the rails yet. I would say overall in our war planning, I don't think there was ever an assessment that Iran would be able to inflict any substantial damage on the US just because they can only thrive on asymmetric warfare, not the conventional. Like one of the biggest miscalculations I would say that Iran did is bombing its neighbors. I don't quite still understand why they did that. It does not make any strategic or tactical sense to me. I totally understand if they want to bomb US bases, but they hit the Kuwaiti airport. I have family there, and UAE airport and stuff like. It does not make any sense why they did that. So what has happened as a result is that we got unexpected extra support. There were people now in the Middle East, from what I hear, who are on the side of Israel and the US to truly get Iran under control because now they're convinced. Before they felt it and they were intuitively thinking that, now they know that this regime in Iran is rogue and will strike without any like common sense at them economically, and it'll inflict pain. So that's a blowback that they had. I would say so. Like I said, like to your question, right? We are not stuck. It's okay. The negotiations are looking like it's fruitful. What remains to be seen, though, is like if you go back to our original objectives of the war, what is that going to look like? Are we going to get back the uranium that they had? Are they going to stop right now, or are they just going to dig deeper into the earth underground and keep doing what they're doing? Are they going to restrain their support for the proxies? Remember, like even though Israel and like has severely impacted, especially Hamas and to some extent Hezbollah, they seem to always be able to bounce back pretty reasonably well. It just takes them a year or 2 years or 3 years. So the question is like, how long is this going to last before somebody has to go do something again? which will be like very unfortunate, not just for the world, but just for the people of Iran, which, like I said, I know Iranians. They're just wonderful people. I just hope that for their sake, that we will wrap this up, the regime will somehow give up this mentality that they have and live at peace. Like take examples from nations around you, like UAE. It's just amazing, a small country and how much voice and impact it has. Same with Qatar, by the way. These are tiny countries if you look at the map. How do they have outsized influence and respect from people around the world? I just hope that the Iranian regime can see that and really unleash the beauty of Iran and the intelligence and the talent that they have to benefit the country and the world.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The most shocking thing about this war was not public opinion. We knew people don't like war. It wasn't the spike in oil prices. It wasn't, China or Russia coming to supply Iran with military equipment. Everyone saw that coming. It was Iran shooting missiles at UAE. It was Iran literally trying to destroy the infrastructure of other Middle Eastern countries. And going back to the question, is the US in too deep? I don't think so. Short answer, as of now, it looks like we have a clear off ramp ahead of us. It doesn't look like a quagmire. There hasn't been a massive ground invasion, just targeted strikes, air naval ops, and now a limited blockade on ports as leverage during the ceasefire. And U.S. losses, right? They've been relatively contained, dozens killed, wounded overall. Trump has repeatedly signaled we're wrapping up this phase with objectives largely met. Pete Hegseth emphasizes we're using a fraction of our naval power. And so there have been a lot of outcomes for the US that have been accomplished. And so I think there's a clear off ramp here. I think everyone wants an off ramp here, including the Iranians. And so we'll see how concessions hold up. But we encourage you guys to join in for upcoming podcasts. This is not done yet. I'm sure we're going to have a follow up podcast because there's so much to talk about with regards to how NATO played a role or didn't play a role in this war, how Middle Eastern countries were affected, and now their relationship with Iran, China's attempted potential to take over Taiwan. Has that been derailed? And so encourage you guys to tune in for upcoming episodes where we dig deeper, try to provide you a balanced perspective from both sides, and hopefully present a view that is trustworthy and true. Thank you guys for joining, and see you on the next podcast. Thanks, everyone.